But my op-ed today and my opening rant here for the program, the op-ed over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "The Students of How to Start a Civil War Have Begun." And, you know, it starts out by talking about Sarah Clendaniel and Brandon Russell, these two people who were arrested yesterday for saying that they were going to completely destroy Baltimore. Right. Their goal was to shoot up power substations. This is what Congressman Adam Kinzinger was worried about when he told Axios last year, I don't think that's a bridge too far to recognize. It's going to be armed groups against armed groups, targeted assassination and violence. Donald Trump yesterday used his Nazi-infested social media platform to push a renewed call for violence by Americans against Americans. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, quote, "It will likely get little attention to no attention today that the current frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination just told his supporters to start arming themselves for a civil war to overthrow the government just in case he loses." And sure enough, that's what Trump was retruthing over on his website. There actually is an active movement within the United States trying to start a civil war. They're armed, they are serious, they have shot up 9 power stations now across the United States. This was going to be the 10th. They tried to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. They tried to hang the vice president of the United States. They've already murdered numerous people across the country. You may not recall names like Pat Crusius and Anders Breivik or James Fields, but the members of a dozen different white supremacist groups in America can tell you the details of the lives of the El Paso murderer of 23 Hispanic people, the Norwegian killer of 77 liberals, mostly children, and the man who killed Heather Heyer and injured dozens others at the Jews Will Not Replace Us Charlottesville rally. These people think of themselves as students of how to start civil wars, and they know that about 15% of Americans, many of them, in fact, probably the majority, certainly the majority of them white Americans, who were in the middle class 40 years ago when Reagan came to power, are no longer in the middle class. They know that ever since the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954 by the Supreme Court mandating for the first time in American history racially integrated public schools, that ever since that time there has been a freak out among white supremacists and racists in America that they can exploit. And this has, of course, also led to the movement that's very close to accomplishing its goals to destroy public education in the United States and replace it with racially segregated private schools. This is what they're all about. I mean, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massey last year was saying, quote, the tipping point will come when, quote, 30 to 40% could agree that the American government was legitimate tyranny and needed to be thrown off. Those trying to bring down the American government need to have sufficient power without asking for extra permission. It should be right there and completely available to them in their living room in order to effect the change. So this guy calling for armed revolution against the American government, he is now on the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government, on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, on the Committee on the Judiciary, on the Committee on Rules, on the Committee of Transportation, on the Committee on the Judiciary. I mean, you know, Ilhan Omar, oh no, you can't have her. She's a black refugee. But Thomas Massey, no problem. Meanwhile, over at the Daily Caller, this was founded by Tucker Carlson yesterday. It leads with an op-ed, quote, "It's 2025. The United States is in chaos. Chinese super shoal soldiers roll in from Canada and criminals rule the streets. You could use a weapon of war, but the Democrats won't allow you to have one that isn't California compliant. The media told you guns are bad and that working out is toxic masculinity. But the Chinese look pretty fit and they have guns. So do the criminals victimizing you. Alas, all that critical race theory and TikTok are useless as they break into your home and kill you." Right. This is, you know, a real thing. These people thinking that violence and the threat of violence is going to bring about political change in the United States. And it started with that 1954 Supreme Court decision and the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan and his institution of neoliberal economics, his destruction of the American middle class, his taking us from a nation that was 1/3 unionized to about 10% unionized. All of those things together have basically destroyed the main currency of government, which is trust. In 1956, almost 80% of Americans said they trust the government to generally do the right thing. Today, it's about 20%. Why? Because we've had 42 years of Republicans constantly whining and complaining and trash-talking the government of the United States. These people, hate our current government. They hate this idea of a so-called socialist government that has things like Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, housing supports, low-cost education. I mean, all of this stuff. It's just they're totally opposed to it, and this is where America is at. So, what do we do about this? How do we step back from this precipice? I mean, when there's this shared sense of grievance, small things can trip off a big problem. So first, Americans have to trust that their democracy works. How do we do that? We roll back Citizens United, and we put into place an election system that is consistent across the country, like Canada has, Elections Canada, national standards for elections. Second, we have to, basically help out the people of all races who've been the victims of 42 years of Reaganomics. Other advanced countries do this by expanding union rights, expanding the social safety net, including free and low-cost medical care, free and low-cost college and trade school. I mean, when people have good jobs and income, they tend not to become terrorists. Our slogan should become, if Canada can do it, why can't America? And finally, and it pains me to say this as somebody who back in the 60s as a member of SDS was surveilled by state police and local police. But nonetheless, I think that the final step is that if we're going to avoid the possibility of a fascist takeover, as has happened in Russia, Turkey, Hungary, Egypt, and the Philippines, our state and local police and federal agencies need to start seriously ramping up their surveillance and infiltration of these domestic terror groups. America didn't ask for a homegrown right-wing terrorist movement. But now that it's here, we need to take it seriously. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. I want to share with you some thoughts on the State of the Union address tonight, Biden's economic accomplishments. Also, a whole neighborhood group of bystanders had to get together to protect a young black man armed with a cell phone from the police. Amazing story. Stick around. We'll be right back.